can come forward and just give some words of welcome. There she is. We've got a few seats in the front for people who are looking for a place to sit. Got about 8 or 9 seats up here. Come on forward, man.
Wow, hi everyone. This is awesome. I want to thank you all for taking the time to come out tonight. See what the boundary study looks like. Please don't hesitate. Don't be shy. Speak up, because this is your time to speak up. This is the time for you to say, oh, I like that option, or I don't like that option, or whatever it is. But that's why Alan's here, and Sherry. I don't know where she is, but Alan and Sherry, and they're here to hear from all of us and to hear our responses to the options. So you want to make sure you get your voices heard and let them know. So thank you for coming out. And the windows are open, it just doesn't feel like.
Thanks, Director Salter. Good evening, everybody. As Director Salter mentioned, my name's Alan. I'm Alan Nielsen. I work as a local government consultant. I was here earlier in Area F doing the previous study, which I'll talk about in a moment. I'll first introduce my colleague, Sherry Hurst, who's part of the consulting team. Sherry also was very active in the earlier study too. We've done a lot of work in the regional district here in Nanaimo, so we're very familiar with the area. It's great to be here to talk about this important study. We've got a number of people from the regional district. I'll just point out Elizabeth Hughes and Lisa Robotham, who have been instrumental in part of this effort in getting us organized and helping us put on these events, and also helping just facilitate the study. So with those introductions, let's jump right in. We got a full house this evening. We are here to talk about potential boundaries, and we're going to talk about them from a technical perspective, and then we're going to hear the community input. And we're going to get not the community input, not just today, but we're going to get it through a survey that you're going to be getting. We've got another meeting coming up. We've got comment cards that we'd like you to fill out. We've got online materials that you can look at and comment on as well. There'll be lots of opportunities to provide your feedback, your input, your ideas. We want to hear all of that. We're going to get to that in a moment. We're going to go through first the technical side of it, because when we look at boundaries in municipalities, technical criteria are very important, because we want to set up any potential boundary. We want to set up any potential municipality for success. We'll get into that in a moment. I will just mention, as many of you will know, there was a study before this one. It was the Area F Governance and Services Study. It was led by a committee of citizens, of your neighbors, chaired by David Grass, who's here with his wife. That study went on for, goodness, over a year, and looked at a number of different issues related to the services that are provided to Area F by the RDN and by other agencies. It looked at, it actually met, we had 5 different community meetings where we engaged with people from across the regional district, from across the area, I should say, from the different centers of the area, different communities that make up Area F. Heard from folks about the issue they had with respect to services, with respect to governance. The committee took all of that information, came back with a recommendation to the RDN and subsequently to the province to say, we believe an incorporation study should be done. We recognize that it's going to be a portion of Area F that would be affected, and we recognize that before any incorporation study to assess the potential of a new municipality could be done, that there would have to be a boundary created. Because Area F, like most electoral areas, is very large, huge in fact, much bigger than any municipality we would need to create. It wouldn't be set up well for success if it was the entire area. That was recognized early on. So it was also recognized that before any incorporation study could begin, there would need to be some kind of boundary identified. And that would be the focus of the study. Our exercise in this study right now, this boundary analysis study, is to try to come up with an option or a couple of options of boundaries that could work for a new municipality. We approach that first from a technical perspective. We're hired by the province with the RDN to come at this from a technical perspective and look at a number of criteria that would apply when choosing a boundary that makes sense. The technical are very important, but so too is the community input. That's why we have these kinds of events and all of the other input opportunities that are available for people to provide feedback and their ideas on what should be inside a boundary, what should be outside of the boundary. So let's jump in. I'm going to give a presentation. And after the presentation, there'll be lots of time for discussion and questions. So the study, as I talked about, the purpose of the study is really to recommend a boundary that could be explored in a potential future incorporation study. We set out to outline criteria that would be used to decide a future study area. We to recommend a potential study area that reflected those criteria. And then also to identify at a higher level what the restructure implications would be. In other words, if we were to choose to incorporate based on the study area that we identify from this study, what would we expect the implications to be as a result of incorporation? So what would we expect the changes to be in terms of services? Who provides them? What kinds of services? In terms of governance, how governance works, who would make decisions? And importantly, in terms of cost, what would it cost the taxpayers within that study area? And we look at that in this study at a very high level. If there is a potential, if there is a future incorporation study, that is examined at a very precise level. Our study, as I mentioned, is broken into two key parts. The first part is the technical analysis. So a lot of research, looked at a lot of data collected, population, land use assessment, roads, services. Looking at the then criteria, using all of those data, criteria relating to land use, criteria related to roads and infrastructure, related to assessment base, the size of base, the diversity of the tax base. We look at the proposed options, which you have in front of you today. We assess the high level impact of those proposed options that I talked about a moment ago. If an option were to result in a municipality, what could residents of that area expect in terms of governance, services, and costs? We then have our community meetings. So we've got this meeting, we've got another meeting next week. We have a survey that's going to come out on June 1st. It's going to be available for 2 weeks. You can get a hard copy of that. You'll get it online as well. The recommended boundary, then based on the technical analysis and based on the feedback we get, we put forward then a recommended boundary that goes first to the regional district and then ultimately to the ministry. The ministry determined they would present the recommended boundary to the RDM of the province in July. Now, the Ministry of Municipal Affairs, which is the agent of the province that's responsible for the local government structure under this boundary, it has the final say in terms of the boundary. Because constitutionally, the province is responsible for choosing boundaries, for choosing the local government structure. So we make recommendations, they assess those recommendations, they pay for this study, the bulk of this study, because they want that technical analysis and that community impact input. But ultimately, they'll be the ones that will say, okay, this boundary makes sense. Should we proceed into a different study? And then if that is the case, if that is the direction that's taken, the ministry will respond to a recommendation from the regional district about a possible incorporation study. We're here, community meetings. Okay, let's talk about the technical analysis. I will mention as well, just we are recording this meeting, so this meeting will be available online as well. I mentioned this later, I apologize. So the technical analysis, we look at a lot of background information, a lot of data to try to understand what boundary would make sense. We look at assessment classes and values, because when we think of a municipality, when we think of local governments across the province and municipalities in particular, we want to ensure that the assessment base is large enough and diverse enough. So it's not all residential, it's not a small base, but it's got enough of the tax base that can be tapped in to pay for the services the municipalities are responsible for providing, because they have a bigger service burden than electoral areas. So when you become incorporated, you take on more responsibilities. We want to make sure that there's a tax base that's large enough and diverse enough so that residents aren't paying the full cost of that. Land uses, we want to ensure that we have in place a boundary that captures the key development areas that exist, because we want to have the more densified the more urbanized areas that exist, the industrial areas that exist within an area, recognizing that here in area F, we tend to be more rural in nature, we've got larger lots, but we do have some clusters of relatively higher density residential, not high density residential compared to urban areas, but higher than some areas of the electoral area. So land use is something that we take into account. Population, we want to have a minimum of at least 3,000 people in the municipality. And that's something the province has stated as a hard criteria that we need to meet in this study. So we want to have 3,000 people at least, but we also need to be very careful that with a different population mark, and that's 5,000 people, because once the municipality hits 5,000 people, it becomes responsible for providing and for paying for its own policing. Most municipalities do that through their SFP, which is contracted by the province to provide policing to municipalities around the province, or most municipalities. The key thing is, though, municipalities with fewer than 5,000 people are not responsible for providing that. The province pays the bulk of that. Once we hit 5,000, the municipality, that is the local taxpayers, pay the bulk of it. So we take into account population, we take into account infrastructure. We've got 3 water systems in area F, 3 RDN water systems in area F. When we think about creating a boundary, we don't want to create a boundary that bisects or interrupts any of those systems. We want to have systems in their entirety within a boundary. It's less important for service areas such as fire services because we're not dealing with physical connections and physical infrastructure. But whenever possible, particularly with utilities, we want to make sure that they're within a boundary. We don't have a lot of utility systems in area F, we've just got a free water system, but we need to be cognizant of that as we think about that. We also think about roads, however, in infrastructure, because when we think about the roads, and that's coming up here in a moment, when we think about the roads, it's not only the length of roads, but it's also the bridges and the ditching, and all that is important because we become, once we are incorporated, we automatically become responsible for paying for our own roads. When we're unincorporated, we still pay towards the road at a much lower rate, a rate that doesn't recover the full cost of those roads. But the Ministry of Transportation and Transit, on behalf of the province, owns the roads and provides the upkeep of those roads. That's why we have such great roads here. So, and that, by the way, is something that I'm glad you found that funny, because that is something that is ubiquitous. It is common to every electoral area in the province. So roads suck. And that's because the province is responsible for that. And I don't need to be discouraging towards the province. It's just they provide it at a rural level, at a very base level. So it's not that they're bad people who are providing it, they just don't have the service level that a municipality would have. So roads, very important because when we take in roads, we're responsible for those. We own them. We can do whatever we want with them. We put active transportation down there if we want. We can change them. We own those assets, but we're also responsible for them. So we pay for them. We always pay more than we did before we were incorporated. So when we think about boundaries, we want to be very cognizant of the number of lane kilometers or road kilometers we take into it, because every one of those kilometers costs money to maintain. Crown lands. We don't have, as municipalities, as local governments, we don't have jurisdiction over crown lands. We don't tax crown lands. And so we want to remove as many of those as possible from possible boundaries. We've also been told by the province not to include a possible crown lands. Some of those crown lands, by the way, could become treaty lands. And so those, like the crown lands, are outside of the jurisdiction of the local government, including the municipality. So we want to, whenever possible, exclude those from that. So all of those different factors are taken into account. All of that data is taken into account. And then we have those criteria, and we think about either importance to exclude the treaty line, as I mentioned. That's something the province has said, and it's something we would want to do anyway because we don't have jurisdiction over those. We can't control what happens on them, we can't tax them. Minimize crown lands, for the point I just said, the same deal. We don't have jurisdiction over those, we can't regulate what goes on in there, and we can't tax this right now. We want to include the village centers. We do have 4 village centers in area F. One we can't include because geographically it's too far removed, and that's Meadowwood. And also to get from Meadowwood to the rest of the area, to the electoral area, we have to go through area G, I believe, and then to Qualican and then into area F. So it's just very far away, and it's not practical to include that. But in our options, we can look at the other three village centers that have more development in there, more commercial base, and form more of a nucleus of a possible community and municipality. We want to include commercial and industrial uses, because as I mentioned earlier, when we become incorporated, we take on more of the service burden and pay for that. So we want to have more non-residential tax base if we can, rather than less. The more non-residential tax base we have an opportunity as a municipality to share the burden of the tax burden with those land classes. In a municipality, municipal council set the tax rate for each category of land. In regional districts, the ratio between categories and among categories is set by the province. So there's more of an opportunity to spread the tax burden across land uses in municipalities than there is in an electoral area. So we want to take advantage of that and make sure that we have a rich and robust non-residential component of tax base. Minimize class 9 farmland. So there is agricultural land reserve, and then there is class 9. Class 9 tends to be in the ALR, not always, but tends to be in the ALR, but not all ALR land is class 9. Class 9 is farmland, recognized as farmland, and receives special taxation status. It received, and the residences on class 9 farm properties receive exemptions from taxes when they are unincorporated that are greater than those exemptions that are offered when they're within a municipality. And it can be substantial. We did some analysis. We looked at a few properties here. We recognized that the same class 9 farmland property in area F, if it were within one of the boundaries, would have an automatic increase, everything else unchanged, of between $150 and $450 a year, just from the loss of that exemption. So we want to minimize the amount of class 9 farmland that's within a boundary. I talked about the roads. We want to minimize, we want to make sure that we have enough local roads to have a good transportation network, a good local road system. We don't want to cheat ourselves with that in a municipality. We want to be very judicious, very careful of how much we bring in, because again, every road kilometer that we bring in costs money. And as a incorporated area, as a municipality, it costs much more to maintain than it does when we're in an unincorporated area. And the reasons are twofold. One, because in an unincorporated area, you've got, first of all, the province paying for it, the bulk of it, we pay some of it, but at a lower rate. The second is that the province divides British Columbia into a number of different, very large contract areas and assigns contractors to do the road maintenance in those areas. And because those are so large and have such huge economies of scale, they get very low rates. Municipalities can't possibly match those maintenance rates. So right away off the top, we're paying more. So we did some analysis again, and we looked at what would a typical property in area F pay as a result of incorporation just because of roads. And it's anywhere from $130 to $400. So we have that $130 for the roads, and we add the police, which I talked about earlier, in one option, which is about $5,000, we can go up to $400. So those things, those triggers really cause us, from a technical perspective, to be careful on the size of the area that we put for boundaries. We're in the residential lands, as I mentioned earlier, we want to recognize, first of all, that we are in a very rural area relative to some of the municipalities in the RDN and on Vancouver Island. In a rural area, we've got large lots. We want to capture the denser areas within our area, recognizing there's not a lot of density, but we also want to exclude those areas that are very large lots and don't really have a lot of development potential because of the size and because of the regional growth strategy and other planning regulations that are in place. And then finally, we have a lot of privately managed forest lands in this area, as we do on Vancouver Island. We want to minimize the amount of private managed forest land that comes inside, and that's for a couple of reasons. One is because we don't, right now, we don't have a lot of control. The municipality doesn't have any control, or we're not able to pass regulations to limit any of the activity, the forestry activity that occurs on forest lands, even if those lands are within the municipality. So they're outside of jurisdiction from a regulatory perspective. And two is that the tax assessment value of those lands is not based on highest and best use, but rather on the value of the timber that's harvested. So we have very small assessment values relative to the other lands, relative to the values of other lands. So for the lowest estimate and the fact that we can't regulate what's happening out there, we try to keep those inside of the municipality. Just a couple of illustrations here. So I apologize, it's not as bright as we would like to have it, but you'll get the picture and I'll explain it. This is area F, you can get a sense of the area within the big line there. I've circled here just some farm properties. So we've got a number of conglomerations of farm properties here that we've left outside of all of the different options, which we'll show in a moment. And we've done that again because of the farm classification. So we've tried to limit that. The blue arrows I've just put up, those are pointing to treaty settlement, potential treaty settlement. Right now, the brown ones are potential treaty settlement lands. So those areas we want to keep out as well. So when we start to map out all of these different properties and these constraints, we start to see that we have to be very careful and we're going to be limited on where we can draw the boundaries. So we want to be careful in doing that. There we see the red blobs, we see the red markings at the just along the highway there. Those red markings, those are our village centers. So this looks at our different land uses. So we want to bring in as many of our village centers as we can, recognizing we're not going to get all of them. So I mentioned earlier that we look at the implications of, and talk about those a little bit, what it would mean, or what all of these implications mean for our different options. The first one is we excluded Meadowwood from it, and that's because Meadowwood, as I mentioned earlier, is just geographically located within Area F in a way that just makes it not practical to have part of a new municipal boundary. This is not to disparage at all or say anything about the aspirations that some people in Meadowwood may have. It's just from a technical perspective, it just doesn't make sense to have them as part of one of the options. Areas with Class 9 farmlands, we've left those out wherever possible. So that's why you'll see on some of the options, they'll have different, they're not big squares, there's different lines, and there's property, the boundaries follow different property lines and try to exclude as much farmland as possible. We avoid creating orphan roads. We avoid drawing lines so that it bisects the road and leaves a chunk of the road, an end of a road in a different jurisdiction. We try to avoid doing that because it creates a lot of difficulty for maintaining those roads and around road ownership. We include our commercial and industrial areas because, as I mentioned, we want to be able to take advantage of that non-residential tax base. We want to emphasize that the technical options that you saw coming in here that we'll talk about on the maps, those options are not a reflection of the broader community or the sense of community. So, put differently, we fully recognize that these boundaries are going to have people in them that don't want to be in them. We fully recognize that we want to exclude some people who would like to be in them. One of the reasons we have these meetings and we have these opportunities for feedback and to get your input is to understand where those properties may be and to determine how we may be able to take that into account and thinking about that we need to adjust these options. We're never going to get it perfect because perfect is not an absolute term, it's a relative term. What I think is perfect, you may have a different view of perfect, but we try to get something that matches up with the technical analysis and can be supported in general through community input. Finally, Area G properties. So as you know, we've got Area G to the north and the east of us. We share a boundary in many parts of the Area G. Our boundary for Area F and the boundary of at least one of the restructure options or one of the appropriation options makes more sense in some ways if we take in small slivers, small areas of Area G. We don't have the authority, we don't have the mandate to do that. We've identified in the options, and you'll see them on the maps, we've identified in the options where those properties are. So if there is boundary adjustment on a bigger scale, and the province looks at it and says, okay, it makes sense to do this, or it makes sense to do that, we've identified where that makes sense. Not to presume that we're going to include other lands from other areas, but simply to identify where there may be some logic to think about that. Okay, we've got option A now. You've got the poster board in the back when you came in, you saw this. We're showing it here. Starting tomorrow, it will be available online. You'll also get a copy of this. You'll see all this stuff, and you can go back and look at this. So this is not going to be the only chance to look at this document, at this slide, or this map. We have option A, which is the smallest of the options in terms of population and geography. The orange represents the bulk of it. And so we're really looking at the Arlington area here, or a big portion of Arlington. The blue are the treaty settlement areas. We can't exclude all of them. Some of them are on the borders. The one that's in the middle, that will create more of a donut. We see municipalities in British Columbia that have that just because of the nature of where treaty settlement lands or potential treaty settlement lands are. So all of the owners there would be the bulk of the municipality. The greenish, olive color stuff, that's a potential add-on area. Though it could make sense, but would only make sense if certain properties in area G were to come in as well. We don't want to presume that that's a possibility. We're just stating it from a technical perspective. This area has a population of about 2,800 growing. It's got a diverse tax base. It's got 25% non-residential. It's got a commercial center. It's got a condensed road network, which is very important. It minimizes the amount of farmland in there as well, and it minimizes the amount of ground land in there. So matching a lot of the technical criteria that we try to think about, we try to action as we go through this exercise. Option B includes everything from option A, but extends a little bit to take into account a big the rest of Barrington and a big chunk of Coons. So there again, we see the dark blue is this option. We see the treaty settlement lands in the light blue. And again, we have that optional area to the east. That optional area is in all three of the options. This area represents a population of about 4,500, 4,300 right now if we include BC staff projections. Will go up, of course, because it's a growing area, but 4,300 people right now. So it keeps us below that 5,000 mark where we start to pay for policing. We've also tried to minimize, again, the road network. We've tried to minimize the amount of farmland. We've tried to minimize and exclude as much privately managed forest land as we can, as we did in the previous option. All of those criteria represented in this document, in this option two.
Your population numbers.
The potential area there is about 187 people right now, so it's not a big, yes. And then option C, which looks a little bit funny, and this one brings in parts of Whiskey Creek, parts of Hilliard, but this one, the reason it's extended along the highway there. South of the highway, we've got a lot of farmland. We've got other lands that we wouldn't necessarily bring into a municipality. So this one includes, though, all the 3 town centers, not Meadowwood, but the other 3 town centers. Still trying to limit the road network that does have the biggest road network of all. So that's a factor. And importantly, it gets us about the 5,000 population. So this one is a little bit more challenging and more expensive than the others from the get-go. And because we've included more residential in here, our percentage of non-residential taxation still remains robust, but it comes down from what was in the previous options. When we think about the considerations and we compare those different options, some of the things that stand out are things I've talked about already. So I'll just reiterate those briefly. Policing. The third option, option C, includes policing because it's about 5,000. The other two don't. Option B is 4,300 people thereabouts. So that will start to get us towards the 5,000, but it wouldn't get us there immediately. Roads. When we're looking at municipal boundaries or potential municipal boundaries, we want to set the possible municipality, the potential municipality up for success. We want to start compact and smaller. So we try to do that. We do that, as I mentioned, in large part, or at least in part, because of the road systems. We want to minimize the roads. Option A, because of the size of the option, clearly has the smallest road network. Option B, larger. Option C, the largest. Water services. The only water services here are in option C. We've designed it so that everything's captured in there. Nothing is bisected. Nothing within a system, an individual system is left out, which is being kept in. The other areas don't have water utilities, so we have less of a constraint. As I mentioned, when we think about setting up boundaries, we want to start small. And one of the reasons I've talked about a bunch of reasons to do that. Most of them are cost related. Another reason to think about that, though, is it's a lot easier to join a municipality than it is to get out. So where we've seen successful incorporations in the past, we tend to see them start small, and then through boundary adjustments, which are administrative processes, through boundary adjustments, as people on their periphery wish to come in and petition to come in, and as the municipality considers those requests and accede to those requests, boundary adjustments can be made to increase the size of the municipality, to add into the municipality over time. That seems to be the way that municipalities will evolve, that just get started in a smaller, more compact area and evolve over time by taking in lands around them based on the interest of the people on those boundaries who ask to come into the municipality. Another key point is, and I think everybody knows this, but I'll just state this, is that nothing happens without a referendum. We are very fortunate in British Columbia, well, for many reasons, but one reason in particular as it relates to the corporation. We're very fortunate in that British Columbia is the only province that defers to local population to determine local government structure, to determine local governance. So what that means is that the province, even though legally, constitutionally, it's responsible for the local government structure, and legally it could determine with a stroke of a pen, as other provinces have done, to change boundaries, to amalgamate this, to change that, to do whatever. In British Columbia, for the last 60 years, we have followed a process, a policy of deferring to local populations. And there's no indication that's going to change with legislation, with policy, or none of this type. What that means then is that every decision as it relates to incorporation involves a referendum, so that people decide. However, with referenda, those who show up determine it. So if you have 10 people or you have 11 people showing up to vote, and 6 vote one way, that's your answer. We had a incorporation recently in the Okanagan, and about a 50% voter turnout. It was very close. It was 53% in favor of incorporating, 47% against. 50% of the eligible voters didn't show up to vote. So that's important when we think about these boundaries, because another reason we keep it small as well, because we want to make sure that people who are interested or thinking about and studying, and also then not just studying, but then being subjected to a referendum at the end of the study, that those people are within, and that people in properties and areas that are uncertain or completely against it, they're not in. We're going to try to leave them out where the technical analysis can support that and where there's community feedback to that effect. And we do that because we want to ensure that people who are interested in doing it have an opportunity to vote on, have an opportunity to have it happen, and those who aren't don't have to face that opportunity. They can join at a later time through boundary adjustments if they're on the of that. Okay, we're going to have some discussion in a moment. Before we get there, we've got comment cards here. I was going to say they're on your tables, but they're on the tables. There were tables. Sorry. They're at the back. They're at the back table. Lisa, the pink sweater is holding them up. So we would, on this comment card, I'd ask for your feedback on the options. There's also this comment card online. You can fill it as well. So if you want to take some time to look at the options, because they're going to be posted online, that's great too. Sticky notes. We've got a board, a blank board at the back. Again, your Lisa, they're sticky notes. We want you to identify your address and just say whether or not you think it should be in or out, if that's important to you. So if you look at the options and you're not in the option, you don't want to be in the option, we'd like to understand that. So please indicate that on the sticky note. Conversely, if you're inside an option and you don't want to be, we want to understand that as well. So tell us that on the sticky note. Survey. Online, starting on June 1st, there's going to be a survey available. We encourage everybody to go to the survey and answer the questions on the survey. We'll have it open for 2 weeks and we'll report out on all of the findings from that survey. All of it reporting out, by the way. What we hear this evening, what we hear next week, what we receive from the comment card, what we get from the survey, what we receive in other ways. All of that information will be summarized and brought forward as part of the report, because it's an important criteria that we look at in addition to the technical criteria. If we will make hard copies available, if through the RDN, they can be emailed, they can be sent out to you if you prefer to do that other than online, so we can accommodate that as well. In July, we're going to be going back to the RDN. We're going to be going back then through the RDN to the province with a recommended boundary based on the technical criteria and based on the feedback that we get. It will be up to the province ultimately to determine whether that boundary makes sense, and based on that, whether they wish to proceed with an appropriation study. Okay, I don't know if anybody has any questions, but let's go ahead right here in the front. How do we request the hard copies of survey? Your number we can phone for the animal? Oh, we print it in and send it in. And okay, if they're not, If you can't print it, phone the RDN, we'll make sure that we'll get it set it up so that we can handle that. Okay, thank you for listening to that. Okay, in the blue sweater, go ahead, ma'am. Absolutely. So how we got here? Okay, certainly. Okay, the question, just so everybody can hear, how did we get, I'm gonna paraphrase, how did we get to where we are this evening? What factors left, what prompted this study and the one before? So as you pointed out, ma'am, the study was done in 2022, 2023. That study was prompted by feedback through the electoral director to the RDN, other related feedback from other processes, the OCP process that have been ongoing, other public processes that have been ongoing, feedback to the extent or kind of on the theme of we are not satisfied with the services we're receiving, with the types of services, the way they're delivered, the cost of the services. We're not satisfied with our current system of governance. That is how we're governed, how decisions are made for our area. We rely on one elected official. Other places have more council, like the municipalities have more than one elected official to make decisions. We want to think about, we want to explore, we want to understand the services and the governance, and we want to be able to provide comments on that because we have some dissatisfaction with those. The study, that earlier study was prompted to explore all of those thoughts, those comments, those questions, that dissatisfaction. The study was broken into two parts, much like ours is today. The first part looked at all of the different services and systems of governance that are in place today. So in other words, it provided the what is. What is in place in area F right now? Where do we get services from? What services are they? Who provides them? How do they relate to other services? Is it just us? Is it other electoral areas that receive the same services? How much do we pay them? On what basis do we pay? All of that stuff was looked at so people understood very clearly what the services situation is in area F today. We also in that study then looked at the governance. How are decisions made over different kinds of services? What's the role of our elected official on the regional district board? Which other jurisdictions participate and help make decisions for our area? Those kinds of questions were explored under that first part of the study. All of those facts that were then taken to the community. There's 5 different open houses, there are number of surveys and mail-outs and all that stuff. To get feedback from the community on its issues or its concerns and its questions that it had with respect to services and governance. That feedback came back, and what the committee determined was that there was sufficient interest in exploring another type of governance, which in our system is going to be the municipality, to recommend to the regional district and ultimately to the province that an incorporation study be undertaken for a portion of area F. The province then said, okay, that's great. We don't do the whole area. It's too big to be a municipality. So we looked in at that portion. We need to identify what portion makes most sense. That's where we come in and say, okay, from a technical perspective, we think these portions make sense. These are the options. And I say, go to the community and say, what makes sense to the community? Yes, ma'am.
What happens to the communities that are left out? Who absorb them? That's part A. And part B is if they wanted to then be welcomed into the enforcement area, you said it's a matter of paperwork, but who's doing that for them? Are they part of the RDN and they have to have a leader that helps them in?
So, two-part question. Thank you. Excellent question. The first question: what happens to parts of area F that are outside of the boundary, and if incorporation did happen, and then if in a future period, if later people in those areas that were left out of the original boundary want to become in, how do they do it? And who organizes it? And how do they make that request? On the first part, it's very common in British Columbia. We have our electoral areas. I keep mentioning, I think everybody knows this, but just at the risk of repeating what you know, I'll just say that the entire province of British Columbia is contained within one of 27 regional districts. Well, there are 27 regional districts. Every regional district has a combination of cities and electoral areas. So these kinds of studies that we're doing right now, and the study that preceded it, you can imagine are not unique to RDN. They happen all over the province. And all over the province, when we have new municipalities created or changes the boundaries of other areas, we see there's always this kind of, these bits that are left out of that area. So what happens to those places? Not only here in Ardennes, but in other parts of the province too. And the answer is, in many cases, depending on how much of the electoral area is left, that electoral area will remain intact. It will just exclude that municipality. The services, they'll still get the services primarily from the RDN, they'll still have the governance from the RDN. The cost of services and the shape of services may change substantially because the cost will go down, first of all, the tax base will also change. So we'll play all that out. The province is responsible for looking at all of that stuff to determine that the impact on those other parts that don't choose to become part of that municipality is minimized. So that's looked at there. That's the first question. And then the second part of the question is, how does a community that's outside of the study area come into the area? What is the process they follow? If it's individual properties, and specifically, in particular, if they're contiguous to, that is, if they're along the boundary of the new municipality, then it's simply a matter of the landowner going to the new municipal council and saying, I would like to come in here on my reasons. And the municipality will say, okay, that makes sense, or it doesn't make sense for this reason, but considering that. If there's agreement, then it's an administrative process. If it's a community or a conglomeration of properties outside of the area that's large enough, then that group with the electoral area director can approach the council, can approach the regional district and start to have a conversation about extending the boundary a little bit more. And depending on the number of people in that area that could come in, depending on how many people there could be a vote of that area. And not typically of the municipality, typically the municipality would agree or not agree based on using just council as opposed to a vote of the municipality. But depending on the number of people in the area that was thinking about coming in, there could be a vote there. Yes, ma'am, in the green.
I'm just curious, that municipalities for the ever consider if you cut a little tiny piece of someone in one area, and then you're gonna do some incorporation, so that we're still even more excluded. Do they ever consider moving that to a boundary that would be more like into a different electoral boundary?
Excellent question.
We're a tiny conflict.
Yes. Conflict. Oh, yeah. Let's vote. Excellent. Okay, perfect. Great question. So kind of a play on the last question is that if an area is left out, is it ever put into a different electoral area? And because it wouldn't be put into a different municipality, it could be put into a different electoral area. In British Columbia, we have two types of local governments. We have our regional districts, which are the local governments for the electoral areas, and we have our municipalities. They're run by municipal councils and administration. So those are two types of local jurisdictions. Electoral areas, as unincorporated areas, have boundaries that are more malleable in the sense the provincial government moves those boundaries around more frequently and at its own decision than municipalities. Once you become incorporated as a separate legal corporation, that's when the province will take more of a backseat and say, okay, if you're going to change your boundaries, that's going to be up to you. But in unincorporated areas, the province will adjust those boundaries to create sustainability from a servitude perspective, from a tax perspective, and so forth. So if you see an orphan area that's left, in some cases, I don't want to speculate what would happen here. It depends on the size of the area, but in some cases, that area would be joined to another adjacent electoral. So it wouldn't be left on its own. Yes, sir.
Okay, why would you lose your farm status if you have the municipality? Because there's other municipalities that have properties that are farm status.
There are lots of municipalities with farm status. You don't lose your designation of farm status, you lose your tax exemption. So you'll still become class 9 farm, and you'll be taxed as class 9 farm, and you'll still get your benefits if you sell a certain amount of produce or product from your class 9 farm. That's where more income tax benefits and so forth. But from a property tax perspective, you'll lose a big chunk of your exemptions. And the reasons for that are a little bit beyond me. I'm not exactly sure why that's the case, but that is what the province has set up, and that's been in place for many, many years. On the back there, sir. Well, that's not exactly true, but it's partly true. So, yeah, I'll go back to the end in a moment. Go ahead. Okay.
Seems to me, we're trying to solve the problem. Certainly from my perspective, I don't know this.
Better thing than, you already go to the point of options. My point is, you understand why we need them. It is not to be beneficial to the community. For you to say that it's not the way we go apart, so we can articulate what we see and we think what we are seeing. Because I think we're trying to solve a problem that's nothing different.
Well,
Yeah,
that was my earlier question, I was trying to get at, what is it that the previous group identified as such an issue necessitating an expense, never study, and then.
Yes, it was, and let me just comment on both of those points that I made. So the question in essence, come here just a second, sir. The question in essence was, or the comment was, what is, I don't understand, or a couple of folks not understanding why we're doing this study. There's no issue to deal with. We should be exploring the issues before jumping to some of the options. I hope that's a fair paraphrase.
You illustrated, roads.
Yep.
And, there was three. But none of those really none of those are public to me.
And that's totally legitimate, sir. What I would like to just remind you of, however, is that the previous study that was done over the course of a year and a half, looked at all of the stuff you just suggested, have those engagement, find out, are there issues and what are the issues?
Why initiated all of them? Because I think it was initiated by one person.
Well, let's put it,
There's an agenda that I don't know.
well, let's put it this way. It was supported by the regional district and the province.
Yeah.
And- And the committee that was done, that was in place last time was a citizens committee. And some of these, one of the key issues we found was around governance. The sense that many people in the room, I'm not going to say everybody, because we heard very much like the last gentleman, that there were no issues. But we also heard from other people who said there are issues. One of the big issues relates to governance. The idea that we want, some of us at least in area want to make decisions for what happens in the area. We don't want others involved in other jurisdictions making decisions over local services. That was an important part that came out of that study. I'm not passing value judgment. I'm not saying that's a good thing or a bad thing. I'm just saying that was one of the functions that came out of that. Let me, and that's your view, sir. And it's a legitimate view. It's just not shared by everyone. Let me go to, let me come back here to plaid shirt. Oh, I beg your pardon. I'm sorry. Another plaid shirt. Yes.
Thank you. Okay, so, I've been at a lot of the meetings for
Yes.
and.
Yes.
Virtual. And one of my questions is, when you guys looked at the government study originally, were you able to look at, because I know that most of the issues that a lot of people have with the RDN and the dysfunction of the RDN and the inhabitants of the RDN, I was wondering if there was a way that you guys were able to look at restructuring that imbalance versus changing us into a municipality, which I don't think I am.
Thank you very much for the question. So the question in essence, through the last study, the study committee determined that there were some concerns and issues to address. Were there efforts to address those issues through changes within the system as opposed to changes to the system? Those issues were addressed. The committee looked at the possibilities within the system. When we look at governance, they're limited in the kinds of things you can do with respect to governance. The committee determined that the change that it would be advocating would be to the system in that case.
So a follow-up, if you don't mind.
Sure.
So if that's the case, being that most of the areas in the RDN have the same concerns and issues with the dysfunction of the RDN itself. Is that not just more of a systemic problem than just piecing apart all of these different municipalities and having seven different things?
I think that, and the question is if this is if lots of different areas within the RDA have the same kinds of concerns, is that not then a reason to address some changes within the RDA rather than look at different areas? I was just going to answer this question. So the answer to that is that you can Every regional district, every local government will always be looking at how we can do things differently to address different issues that arise. Some of those issues we'll see in the electoral areas, some of the issues we'll see in the municipalities that are also part of the regional district. So that goes on a regular basis. As communities evolve within the regional district, as unincorporated communities get to different points in the revolution, some of them will choose to look at incorporation. The study committee from the previous study felt that this area, or portions of this area at least, were at the point where they're ready to look at that change through the system. That doesn't preclude changes within the system or to the regional district as a local government. I would say it's incumbent upon every regional district to be looking for those changes all the time. And perhaps those changes will address many of the issues. Irrespective of that, the committee determined that it wanted to explore incorporation. Now, I've got this gentleman here in the flag shirt, and keep your hands up, I'll help you get all in a second.
So first question would be, if there is an incorporation in municipality, do you speak to it all minimum number legally that a council would require for an maximum number?
So the number of council members, we would be looking for, depending on the size, it would be between 5 and 7.
The next question would be,
So,
proof. Everything disappears and the council determines what's there, agreeing with the person,
so
it's problem.
sure, yeah. So what happens to zoning? Because land use clearly is an important part of local government and local communities. In a new municipality, once a new municipality is created, in that transition time, the new municipality, because we need to have something in place when the municipality starts, it inherits the bylaws of the regional district as they relate to a number of different things, including land use. From day one, however, the new municipal council is responsible for and has the authority to change the zoning bylaw. So most places, when they appropriate, because in many places it has to do with land use, if it's general land use, most places they put at the top of the work program, we're going to develop a new official community plan and follow that with a new zoning plan. So that's going to be based on the new council, that would be a new council's prerogative to do that or not do that. In most places, they tend to do that as one of the first parts of the things. Yep.
So let's call it transition period.
Yes.
Typically, when it happens, typically is that a year, 2 years?
Typically a year for that kind of initiative, for the land use initiative. And over that period, that transition period also, because as I mentioned earlier, there are a new municipality takes on certain cost burdens that an electoral area doesn't have. The province will give bridge financing for a number of years to help the municipality get set up. I've got a gentleman in the green rugby shirt there in the back, and then I've got some other folks. Yeah, I got you there next man, but this gentleman's had his hand. You go ahead. Yeah. Okay. Two questions and a suggestion. Okay. Go for it. Yep. Okay. Yeah. Yes.
We cannot see it. They weren't the owner. We all paid for it. It's not there. It's on the shelf. And we are doing the corporations. I know there's what can we not do that? What can we not see that? What are we not talking about? And we pay for, we owe the digital foundation. Everything we did is 25 years. I'm not.
Okay. Let me ask. I'm going to ask Director Salter to comment on that. I don't know the reason for that, but I'll let her.
Thank you. Yeah, it's been 19 years with that OCP. What happened was it did get to the community, about 5 years ago. When it did come to the community, they didn't like it. There were new TPAs in there that nobody wanted. A lot of rules, a lot of things around, if you bought property, you weren't allowed to cut the trees down. And if you wanted to cut the trees down, you had to get the approval of the regional district, and then you had to spend anywhere between $3,000 and $5,000 to get an expert to come out and decide whether or not you could cut that tree down. And that's only one of the DPAs. So I just sent it all back. I said, no, we don't like the DPAs. So they're actually now going, and they are doing this, they're slowly going over it and dealing with all of those things that cause so much distress to the community. But it does take time. And so I'm not pushing them because I want something good. I don't want to push them to do something that we're not going to like to. So that's where it is. But yeah, it has been 30 years since we started this, started the incorporation study. We've just never gotten this far, that's all. And now we have. One more thing, I just want to say, I want to say Director Wallace is here from Area G, and Director Swain, actually Mayor Swain from Lansville, so welcome.
Okay, okay, yeah, last question on the referendum, then I'm gonna come to this lady here, and then I've got this gentleman in the front, I guess, go ahead. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Within a year. What's going on? Apparently, people know, I was told, you join it again. Would be 364 days. And
Okay, yeah.
And what the regionals did was they qualified. Gary, when was built, and
I can't help you with that, but I can comment that your comments, sir, at least they do talk about some of the dissatisfaction that prompted this kind of initiative. So I thank you for that. I don't have the answer, but I'm gonna go to this woman here who's had a pen. I know everybody's been very patient. I'm coming to, I've got you all, don't worry. Go ahead, man. Yeah. The ones that we circled on that map, those areas are on what we would consider to be the periphery of a more natural urban or semi-urban area. So would be a rural municipality compared to other municipalities. We excluded those, not because there's a view that they're outside of the small C community or they're not part of our community as a kind of a value thing, but simply because those properties, as I mentioned earlier, they're large farm properties that would have big tax hits if they were brought in. Now, Director Salter commented earlier, quite rightly, that a municipality can change the Class 9 rate for the Class 9 land, not for the residents on the land. So there can be some mitigation. However, on most of those properties, the percentage of total value that is ascribed to the land as opposed to the residents is far less than 10%. So the remedy there is going to give you minimal relief. We exclude those lands because when they become part of the municipality, they lose the exemption that applies to their house, to the residents on those lands. And that can be a significant impact.
They have choice.
They can, yeah, anybody on one of those properties can come to us and through this process, or even after, even if a municipality were to be created, for the municipality after and say, we want to come in despite the tax increase. And now we've got this gentleman here at the front. Go ahead.
I just wish to answer why we are here today. I've been here over 40 years. I sat here during the zoning wars, the building inspection wars. That's why we're here today. We want to control ourselves. Raven Song is just a sample of what's coming. Wait till the hospital comes. There's gonna be tax increases like you've never seen before. The Raven Song issue, if you listen to certain knowledgeable people in the news, was not gonna cost 30 million, it was gonna cost us short of 50 million. So we have to have our own control of this area, and the way to do it has taken so long to get the government to cough up with the money for the studies. I'm told that a few years ago, we almost got there, but another area in British Columbia was ahead of us in the line for the $55,000 to do the studies. Okay, now it's our turn. Very good to see you all here.
Thank you, sir. Okay, I got this gentleman in the back, then I got you, sir, and then I got you over there, so then I got you in the back, so go ahead, sir. I do remember you.
We went over all of these things, finally voted in favor of the figure studies and calculations and one vote. But you may recall, I asked them 3 times. This question. If the current standard is any community can answer the things. All the beach, the annexed, as much of their efforts they wish to, the Parkville right now has kind of an agreement not to do anything, but that could be rescinded by any city council. Some of you may have the meeting, the previous mayor of Parkville is pushing to study to annex area in fact. So that's why we go to study environmental to be annexed by the surrounding community, and we would have no say in that.
Thank you for that, sir. Yes. Wait there, sir. Go ahead. Yeah, then you, yeah.
I have a two-part question. One is, why is there no out option?
Well, there's you can write on that or on the back. We'll look at those. We don't have a computer looking at those. We'll look at every comment card and make sure we transcribe what you thought.
And the other one is a governance issue.
Yeah.
So if, let's say, Aaron became incorporated,
Yes.
who then do they answer to? Not the RDN anymore,
So
the province, right?
well, let me explain that. It's a little bit different. So if a municipalities in British Columbia are autonomous legal entities. So they are under provincial law, they were created under provincial law, but once created, they have a lot of autonomy, a lot of power to make their own decisions, to do their own thing. Do they answer to the province? They answer to the province to the extent that the province is responsible for the local government system in British Columbia. But the province exercises that responsibility by creating legislation. In our case, in the case of the municipality, it's mostly the community charter. We also have the local government act. Those pieces of legislation govern what municipalities may do. And what I mean by that, when I say govern, they put in place the parameters outside of which municipalities may not act. So, for example, municipalities cannot run deficits. They cannot run operating deficits by law. So that's a safeguard that the province puts in place. So to that extent, they answer to the province to the degree that they have to play within the guidelines and the rules set by the province. Does the province have the authority to override municipal council decisions? Very rarely and under limited circumstances. So they are quite autonomous in that. Would they be part of, or would they answer to the regional district? They would be part of the regional district, just like the city of Nanaimo, for the town of Fulton Beach, the city of Parkville, the district of Landfill. Those 4 are part, in fact, every municipality in British Columbia belongs to a regional district. They rely on the regional districts for certain services, but the services they receive from regional districts are those that make sense for the municipality to receive. In most cases, services received by a municipality from a regional district are services that the municipality chooses to receive, so they're voluntary. For reason of cost, or for other reasons, they choose to participate. That's the legal term, participate in the service of the regional district. And when they choose to participate, they pay towards that service on the same basis of everybody else who participates, and they participate in the decision making for that service, but they don't answer to the regional district.
Did I hear you say that the regional district makes sense?
Well, this may be an unpopular view, but I am actually quite a fan of the regional district system. Okay, no, wait a second, I have this gentleman over here, go ahead. Yes. If we have, let's hit quiet, guys.
Don't want to go over every boundary here, but you can lay it over so we can look at it.
Yes.
So they put in the roads.
Yes. Okay, we'll have you on road, yes.
That's fine. Lay over.
Yes.
Two, with deficits in municipalities. Regional districts do not have that option. They can run a deficit. Why?
They cannot run an operating deficit. They're the same constraints as municipalities. They can run capital deficits in the same way the municipalities borrow and pay that over time. But the payments they make on debt also must be captured in their operating, so they can't run deficits. They have to. No, every regional district, every municipality must remain. Well, that's one way, I will concede that one way local governments. Yes. Well, where I live in the Okanagan, the town of Oliver raised its taxes last year by 39%. So, and the district of Lake Country raised its taxes by 17%. So it can happen. There's lots, a municipality does not save you from those kinds of things necessarily. But to what we've heard, it at least gives you control over those decisions through your council. Okay, I've got this gentleman here. Go ahead.
Are we here because we do not want the RDN controlling us?
Yes.
Yes.
That's why I'm here.
Okay, so that's a rhetorical question. Yes, okay. Well, I'll let everyone else answer that. I don't have a view on that, but it sounds like everyone does do. Sir, you look back at a question. In fact,
Can you stick up?
go ahead, sir. Yes.
Well, I was gonna say, what's the lowest tax, greatest economy,
In terms of the options,
in terms of, yeah.
so what is the lowest tax, greatest autonomy path? And that was the question. I'm just repeating the question so everybody can hear that. I don't want to sound like I'm hedging on this, but I've got to just explain that a little bit, my answer kind of as I give it, because it's a little bit complicated. The tax system, the amount you pay in tax is a function of a few things. One is the tax base of which you're a part, how big is it, how diverse is it? Another is the tax rate is set by the government. In the case of the municipality, the council, in case of the regional district, the regional board. And then the third would be the, what's the third, Jerry? I only do this, I mean, three things, and I always forget the third. It was a good one, though, but I'll come back to that. And then the number of services you have. So if you incorporate, because you want to get more services, you can expect to back pay for those services, your tax rate will be affected. If we look at when we do incorporation studies, we do apples and apples, so we say, forget about we don't presume any decision that a future council may make. We instead say that here are the services we receive today. Let's assume that we have the same services at the same levels inside a municipality tomorrow. What would the very act of becoming incorporated do to those taxes? So we don't presume that there's extra services or fewer services. So we look at that. So that's kind of the background. Now to address the question, if all other things being equal, in terms of autonomy, a municipality is always going to be more autonomous than an electoral area. In terms of lowest cost, the lowest cost option is going to be the one with the tightest boundaries, with the least amount of farmland, the least amount of privately managed forest, which has paid no tax, basically, with the highest amount of industrial and commercial taxation, and with the smallest amount of roads, and with a population below 5,000. And looking at those criteria, option would be the one which would be the lowest tax. Sir.
When I came to Little Mountain, there was about 7 houses on the hill. There's now 30. So you go back to how the RDN is governing themselves. We have Leanne doing the best job she can to work for all of us. But there's 9 votes from the NIMO that control everything they want for the regional district. So that's why we're here. We need to get on our own.
Now,
Yeah, I'm just a little, I'm a little.
go ahead, ma'am.
I'm hoping you can help me sort of clear up some confusion. Earlier in the presentation, you know, you were talking about going with option A or B or C, and then we had a question about what if you're outside the boundary? What if we chose whatever, we went with option A, and then somebody outside the boundary wanted in, you know, they could probably do that, they could reach out, or whoever could reach the other direction. But then we just had a question that was about Parksville or Qualicum Beach could just annex us. So the previous thing sounded like a really sort of a friendly thing where you're not gonna find yourselves up against a wall. And like, I don't get this Qualicum Beach or Parksville could annex us. Can you help me sort of?
Sure, so any municipality, because municipalities are legal entities, autonomous entities, and they have more autonomy, more authority than unincorporated areas. Although unincorporated areas working through their regional district are also, regional districts in the case. But we do have a difference in levels of autonomy, levels of authority between municipality and electoral area. Any municipality can reach out to bring in areas on its periphery and will appeal to the province for permission to do that. It still goes to the province for that. If you are trying to capture industrial assessment, that's one motivation. If you're trying to bring in others because they form part of the community or because they have a feature that is interested, that is of value to the community, or they petition to come in, that's a little bit different. So a lot of it will depend on the motive, and I can't comment on the motives of any of the municipalities in the area, but on the motives to accept or to bring in lands. That process though will involve the province, because the province is the one, the arbitrator, that has to finally make the boundary changes. And back to sir.
So, autonomy, that's been spoken out, by the majority of corporations, the autonomy we are in there, is that, you know, community we would like. We've got autonomy, setting the mill rate. And if so, we would do that being able to lower the mill rate once we work.
The answer to both questions is yes. And I'll just add to that, to flesh that out a little bit by saying the mill rate or the tax rate is set as a reflection on the assessment base and the services you receive. So as you build more services or as your tax base changes, you're going to set, the council is going to set its mill rate to ensure that it captures enough so that it doesn't go into deficit. Can it change that? Absolutely. Can it also change the tax rates across different types of lands and land classes? Yes, it has more autonomy to do that than a regional district. So it has, so the answer to both questions is yes. I had one woman over here in the orange. Yes.
Well, yeah. Let's get back. Here's our corporation or nothing. Yes, so I understand you're saying. When committee studied this over the course of a year and a half, I've been meeting. So the concerns coming from the beginning were around governance issues, service issues, economy issues. So to me, there should be another big piece of paper on that wall that says, okay, here's some incorporation options. Here's an option that says, let's look at the argument class a little differently than there's been that maybe time to fill it in half or something. Population can grow. Whether that would work or not, I still think it could be part of the option that people get to look at, say, this is what it looks like. We split the argument. You didn't get that all the burden of votes from the urban centers. What I see here is another incorporation municipality, which is going to have more urban vote to be directed to the district and incorporation. So I feel like we're missing another option, and I know you got $55,000 with this, but you're obviously not why. That's why I think that made a grant on these issues.
Yeah, it's a very legitimate question you ask, and when we look at some of these exercises around the province, our previous exercise with governance services, Sherry and I were involved in one of the shoe swap that actually said, we want to study this incorporation, but we also recognize that if this doesn't happen, we want to divide this electoral area into two and look at changes there for some of the reasons you talked about. Because either the governance could be addressed within the system, if incorporation didn't work, and that ended up happening, because incorporation didn't proceed. There are other initiatives that the province has looked at. Comox Strathcona, it used to be one regional district, now it's two regional districts. Comox Valley regional district, Strathcona regional district. So there's all those options out there. As you pointed out, we were hired to do this study. We were hired based on the recommendations that the committee gave to the province to look at this particular issue. Does that preclude the province from studying other issues, or from initiating studies of other issues, or the regional district from initiating studies? Not at all. But our study looks at this. Peter. Well, Diane, go ahead.
I just wanted to comment that the governance study that we got, I know you mentioned that there's all these regional districts across the province, and you say you just say even that you agree with that process. But I do recall back then that you pointed out that maybe there's 3 regional districts in all of BC that are weighted so heavily that one particular, as in this case, Nanaimo, having most of the say, which is the very reason why we're upset, because every time there's a monetary issue that goes on, they vote for Nanaimo, and we have no say in the matter because it's all weighted for them. And so that's the comment I want to make. That, yes, you mentioned regional districts.
Every very valid point, and you're quite right. This regional district is somewhat unique. There are only a couple of in the province where we have one jurisdiction, in our case, the city of Nanaimo, that by virtue of its size and its representation on the board, has considerable authority over decisions in other jurisdictions. So you're quite right. Yes, sir.
But to my understanding that, the provincial government's policy is to, punish municipalities that are not, adding to the density building. And I'm not familiar with, if we have municipalities, we usually try to go to, are we going to see, how would I say, and the second one of the things I think we stay in the regional district. Does the provincial government have the same mandate of the regional district?
Excellent question. So we've seen lately, as the gentleman has pointed out, we've seen an uncharacteristic intrusion in municipal autonomy by the provincial government in requiring municipalities to allow densification within built-up areas. It doesn't, by the way, force municipalities. So, and it doesn't say we're going to add units to the house, but it gives.
It's in Victoria, and this will be slowly.
Yes, Oak Bay, District Oak Bay. Yes, funny story about District Oak Bay. If you go to the planning department of Oak Bay, they'll answer and they'll say, how did you get this done? Anyway. Anyway, that's not here nor there. I grew up in Oak Bay, so I can say that. But yes, so municipalities must allow that to occur. The province is stepping to do that. It does require the market to justify to have home builders come and want to subdivide the lots. So we don't see a huge uptake of that. We do see municipalities being punished, not necessarily for that infill initiative, for not complying with that, because they have to comply with these pointed out, but we see them being punished for not meeting legislative housing targets. Would a municipality be subject to the same kind of thing? Yes, it would. Is the regional district, in built up areas in certain parts of the regional district, if not this regional district, from others, yes, it would as well. But in this particular part where we have more of a rural area, would you be subject to that kind of infill? And likely would, as it was every other municipality would. And that's been a source of some tension for municipalities. Yes, ma'am.
Could I just comment on that? The health department really controls the development in this area.
The health department, even to the septic and all that, of course.
The government is only one. Health wise, we don't need
You're quite right. So we're going to be limited in the lot size we can go into because we don't have municipal sewer. So the health department, the exercise of interior health is going to have sewer. But I have that, yes. Okay, I'm just trying to, I'm trying to reach out to individuals who haven't asked questions yet. So go ahead, sir.
Yeah. Has there ever been a possibility of an added regional district?
Good question.
So like a Oceanside regional district or separated? Sometimes. So.
Yes.
Or.
Yes. Yeah.
Is that a possibility?
Is it a possibility to, in essence, divide the current regional district into two? Is that just, yeah, so we got, because right now we have two sub-regions in effect, we have districts, we have 69 and 68. 69 being the Oceanside area, this area as well, it's in the north part of the RDN, 68 being the southern part. That is a possibility that the province could entertain for sure. I know that we did actually, Sherry and I were involved recently in an initiative in the central Okanagan where the committee that studied it came forward with a recommendation to change the boundary of the regional district to put one area into a different regional district, and that was rejected by the province. So the province will look at that, but it is legally possible, and it may make some sense as well to deal with some of the governance of that. Area is one of the bigger regional districts, for sure.
I have two questions.
Okay,
If it does come through, and have all these areas that we choose from, is the entire area package vote on these areas?
no, it's just the area within, it's just the people who are going to be within
The
and
people
affected.
get a tax rate, but it's like.
Well, it's one of the reasons we tried to, again, guided by the last study, which recommended going to look at incorporation. We tried then to pick a boundary that makes most sense financially and for other reasons. The people outside of the boundary get to vote in the referendum, but they don't. They're not going to be the ones who are immediately affected by what goes on in the boundary. They will be affected because they're not part of that.
Yeah.
And so how that is though, and I mentioned earlier, I think in the very first question, what happens to the places that are not outside of the boundary? There's every effort of the province is responsible then for ensuring that those areas are left sustainable financially and otherwise. So they are in that sense taken care of, if you will. But no, they don't get to vote in the right. Wait, you're coaching them. You already asked.
But in this, and this.
Okay.
There's groups of us in part of this talent. I'm over here, there's some small ones there. But people don't want to even.
Yes.
And they want.
So what we're asking is that you identify that on the board there.
Yeah.
And because if we know that now, it's easier to come in than it is to opt out. It's not impossible to opt out. And even during incorporation studies that have boundaries going in that we're studying, in the last two that Sherry and I have been involved in, there have been small changes to the boundary over the course of the study. So it's not impossible, but it's easier to address those things before a study is done. And if you mentioned, by the way, there's been no promise by the province or anybody that an incorporation study would actually occur. They reserve judgment on that. They want to look at the boundary first, then they'll make the decision, do we proceed with the studies. The region, if you're looking at it from the regional district, the regional board would likely be the initiator of that and say, for these reasons, we feel that we are better off having two separate regional districts.
So again, we talked about it at the end.
In my own view, I think it would be unlikely that the province will split our game.
Even though you said in the past that it's balanced with how many counts.
Well, the southern part would be more imbalanced in that case. I think the province instead would look at changing part of what are called the letters patent to look at the voting unit to reduce the dominance of the city of Nanaimo. That's a reason for it to Let's talk after. Yeah, that's okay. Okay, go ahead, man.
To what options end up going with, is that you, like your company, then take the results from this meeting and the next meeting and the online survey and all of that, decipher it, and then you tell us what the option is?
We will make a decision, we'll make a recommendation based on the technical, based on everything you just noted as well. The ultimate decision then goes to the regional district. The regional district will determine whether to pass it on to the province. They likely will, because that's the role they play in this capacity. The province will then look at it. And they'll assess the technical factors, they'll assess the community input, and they'll say, this makes sense, or the consultant, this, and this, we want to go back and look at a different option. Yes, yeah.
So I just have a question, so if it's Arrington, Foods, Villiers, and it's amalgamated, are two of those areas losing their name? Is it gonna be-
That's a fascinating question. Yes, that is, those are fighting words, yes. Okay. So, what would the name, okay, we're jumping way ahead here, what would the name, so, there are.
Legit question.
It's a very legitimate question, so just let me answer this just for a bit of a story. So, 2006, 2007, we were involved in the study that resulted in the incorporation of what's now the city of West Kelowna. So that's on the west side of Okanagan Lake, take the bridge over to Kelowna, it's all part of that regional district. At the time, that electoral area had 30,000 people. So it was the largest in the province, it was crazy, the province kept trying to encourage incorporation, they finally went for it. They looked at two different options. One was to become their own municipality and one was to join the city of Kelowna. The part of the electorate that wished to become their own municipality won by 1/2 of 1%. And so they were super united going into this. And then they turned around 6 months and they said, okay, we've got another referendum. We now need to decide on a name. So they had West Bay, which was the traditional area of the west side, or West Kelowna. And everybody who had voted against becoming their own municipality as opposed to joining Kelowna lived closest to the lake and felt that they were part of Kelowna. In fact, some of them even felt they used to go try to vote in city Kelowna elections because they thought they were part of Kelowna. So the option was between West Bank and West Kelowna, and West Kelowna advocates won by 1/2 of 1%. So they're just doing great. Yeah, no, but they are doing great now in our West Kelowna, but you still if you ever fly to Kelowna, you drive from the airport to downtown Kelowna, and you'll see a street marker sign there, a highway sign. You'll say, downtown Kelowna, so many kilometers, West Kelowna, so many kilometers, Peach on so many kilometers, and the West Kelowna has been scratched out and puts West Bank in there. Yes, ma'am.
I'm not ready to fill this in tonight. I don't see any way to get this to you other than to leave it here tonight.
How are we?
We have a meeting next week.
We have a meeting next week. And
no other way we can get this.
we can, I'm gonna put Elizabeth or Lisa on the spot. How can we?
Take a picture.
You probably drop it in the floor. Okay, so is there, can we have
You guys, we need to find a way.
Is there- there is an online option, yeah, but we'll have, I think we'll arrange and we'll communicate a local drop off as well to do that. So thank you.
I can leave a box in the post office in Arrington.
There we go. Thank you, post office.
Pick a lock, and mail me a box.
Okay, you work in the post office?
I know nothing about that.
Just gonna rent in the box to the post office. Yes, sir.
Good
Quick
idea.
question.
So I was involved years ago with both the initial stab at it. I sat on the first group. Can't think to go through this process. Two totally frustrating processes. I walked out of anything to do with anything we already had for years after because I was sick and tired of it. Question for you. Were you given the information from the initial incorporation study that stumbled along until it stalled?
We looked at that information when we did our first study, which was the previous study under the area. We saw that stuff, yes.
Okay, now, one of the reasons why that one died is it timed out, didn't, between the REM journeying us around and the municipal affairs department in Victoria journeying us around, was a little window where stuff was supposed to happen. And we were like little sheep, dogs, kind of all ready to go, and they timed us out. Julian was quite involved with that, I remember that well. Does this one have the same potential just to time out and then 20 years from now, we move to, well, my kids, I'll dead by then, but will my kids be going through this same process? We're going, hey, we still are very unhappy with the regional district. They don't listen to us. We don't have a say. They were really pissed off at their taxing system because most of us that live on regular money we're not getting 8, 9% increases every year. And we really don't give a shit about whether or not they wanna put, $50 million extension on the pool. Most of us moved to area F. I've been here my entire adult life. We moved here to get away from government, but unfortunately it's insidious and it's flowed out much like sort of when you're French. So, I mean, it's, Director Salter, Director Fell, Director McLean, Director all the way back as far as I can remember. They've all attempted to try and have a say here. And I think, the movement towards corporation is an attempt to try and have a say. But it's also a dangerous say too, because just because you're in the municipality doesn't mean the future council necessarily gives two rat's asses about you.
No, that's an excellent point. That's a very good point. Like, think of that. Couple of things in response. First of all, you look like you have far more than 20 years of runway left. No. Second, I think it's, does this study have the legs to keep going up and get cut off as we were in previous years? No. The answer is no, we're not going to be cut off. The answer is that the province hasn't done this. We're working closely with the province. They expect an outcome of the study. It may not be the outcome that people want, but they want an outcome. So there will be a conclusion in this. If it doesn't get the outcome people want, people come back, that may happen. When we look at areas that ultimately do incorporate, it usually takes 3 or 4 iterations before there's enough support and before there's before the incorporation action occurs. And that's fine. That's part of the process. But within that iteration, within that evolution, we want to ensure that studies, in particular, this study, reach their conclusion. This study will reach a conclusion. I can assure you of that. With respect to the rural municipality, the desire to keep government from coming in here because we move here, we don't want the heavy regulation, we want a different way of life. There are examples in the province, the chosen being one in Victoria that has incorporated, they did incorporate because they want to protect that rural way of life. They found that the best way to do that was to have their own council of a rural municipality, to not make the kinds of decisions that municipalities typically make in urban areas that are typically driven by more of a development ethos. So they made that decision, but as you quite rightly pointed out, it depends on the council you get. The next thing is you vote for the council, and your council makes the decision, they're not made elsewhere. Everybody who's involved with the decision-making table is accountable to you. That's the difference with the municipality. Yes, ma'am.
This lady here, Mr. Patrick.
Oh, okay. I'm gonna first here and then we're gonna green. Give me 1 second. I'll come to you next. Go ahead.
So statement, so minimizing farmland, therefore will tax the farmers more, and the working class people provide food for the people. And then making it hard for farmers to be able to afford to farm, and then forcing the farmers out of their land due to overtaxing. And then property developers will build a bunch of houses on potentially thousands of acres of our farmland. But really, we need to protect our farmland, so why do we want to minimize farmland?
So we don't want to minimize farmland. We want to minimize the inclusion of farmland in a new municipality. We want to protect farmland for reasons of food security, for reasons of lifestyle, for reasons of economics, and the families that run farms. All of that's important stuff. We want to ensure that farmland and the owners of that farmland receive the maximum exemption from taxes they can get so they can be viable and sustainable. They continue to farm. We do that by not including them in a municipal boundary. That's the difference there. It's good. Okay, excellent. Yes, ma'am.
I've been here 4 years. I think I'm confused why they're there. They don't. And exploring the idea of the district, the idea of creating one here. What about incorporating some of our values?
Yeah, all very legitimate questions. And I go back to the example I gave in the North Okanagan where we had the exact same sentiment in an electoral area in the northwest side of Okanagan Lake. They were part of the regional district of Central Okanagan, which is dominated by the city of Kelowna. But all of their services, their kids went to school, they got the police from, the city of Vernon. Why can't they join the regional district with the city of Vernon and the North Lake Canal? And the province looked at that and said, no, we're not ready for that story. So they made that decision. Do you have more sense of affinity with the Port Alberta area here in Area F? If you do, that's a legitimate value, and that's something perhaps to explore. If this study, once it's concluded, doesn't get the changes you're looking for, that's something that's possible. So I mean, provincially, you mean, or, okay, yeah. No, it's great. Thank you for that. I appreciate that. Okay, folks, we're getting to the end of the night here. Any other burning questions? Sir? Anyway, yeah. What's wrong? Why would you? I mean, okay. So when is Meadowwood stuck with, by those guys, I think you mean the regional district?
Yeah.
Okay. Is Meadowwood stuck with the regional district? Well, as we mentioned earlier in response to some of the questions, if an incorporation were to occur in Area F, that would prompt the province to look at all of the other communities in Area F that are outside of that area, and it would prompt the province to look at other electoral areas nearby the borders, area H, area G, and so forth. And would say, what is now most viable for the areas there? Let's take advantage of this opportunity of a change in governance within one area to rationalize boundaries elsewhere. So I don't know what the outcome would be, but Meadowwood, by virtue of its geography, would be a logical community for the province to say, does this make sense in the rest of the area now that we've had this change? But you'll be in the regional district. Okay, last question to Diane. Oh, okay, last question to Vancouver, but first Diane.
Better what you're saying, you might pull somebody else, we still have all these roads, farmlands everywhere. That are now, any one of those get picked, are now groups of people without much representation at all. In the RDN because of how it's structured, what happens to these guys?
They are part of it, just as they are now, they are part of an electoral area that is represented by an electoral area director. So they would become part of either the remainder of Area F or Area F combined with another area, or whatever the determination was at that point. We don't include them in the boundary, not because we're trying to deny them representation, but because there can be significant tax implications. If we hear from people, or if a new municipality hears from farmers on the outskirts that have large properties that don't have development potential, that they want to join the municipality, that's something for the new council to consider. But we keep them out of the new out of any potential municipality in our options, unless we hear otherwise from folks because of the tax impact.
They're not in Area F, but they're not in.
No, they would be part of Area F. They would be
Part of Area F,
yes.
not Area F.
Still exists, but then
Yes. And we would carve out a portion of Area F. Area F would remain. We would carve out a portion of the municipality. We excluded it from these options. In the same way we've excluded groundlands, in the same way we've excluded lower density residential with large properties. We've excluded a bunch of the electoral area director.
Electoral, like Leon's alteration.
Yes, yes.
Even though they're not part of that.
They're part of electoral area F. They're property.
They're not part of the actual boundary.
They're not part of the municipality boundary, but they're part of the electoral area boundary. Okay, so let's move on. I've got two questions, and I'm gonna pass it to Director Salter after I make a few closing comments and we'll end today. Thank you, Renash, go for it. There are. We try to minimize however many we get in there, based just because of the geography and because of. It means that each of the areas captures some farmlands. But we try to exclude as many farmlands as we can. We try to draw the line in a way that doesn't include farmland. Yes, and so when you have farmland surrounded by other lands, by non-residential or by residential lands, it's difficult to exclude that. We can't create building holes. So we try to minimize the amount that comes in, recognizing that we're going to capture some. It's inevitable. You're quite right. We're moving after some farmland. The criteria we look at again is try to minimize the amount that's captured in the boundary, but your case in point, some farmland is captured in. They continue to farm, absolutely. The land, nothing changes with the land use. They lose an exemption on tax. Yes. Last question here, sir.
We better get on with this and get moving past the study period because the RDN will not need the new building and headquarters if we're not part of it to pay for it. Did you know they want a new palace? Who has to pay for it? Taxpayers.
Okay, folks, I'm gonna pass it over to Director Salter to wish us good night. Before I do, I want to emphasize a couple of points. Please take a comment card. If you're not ready to fill them out, submit them now. We've got boxes to put them in now. Please, take them to the post office and everything, or please take them to the RDN, or fax them, or email them, or whatever you can go online, fill them out if you wish. Surveys online starting on June 15th. Please go on there. I beg your pardon, June 1st, and then June 1st, start June 1st. Please fill that out. Please, come to the next meeting if you wish, a week from this evening. It's advertised. You're more than welcome to come to the exact same thing. If you want to come and hear some of your neighbors, please do so. Thank you for coming out this evening.
Thanks for having
us.
I want to thank you all for coming tonight as well. I knew this wasn't going to be great because we had been going through these and we were hearing the results. But I want to say this. I don't know if you've heard, but we do have a 25% tax coming off the industrial / commercial area that we have in Hamilton. I don't know, where else are you getting 25% off? So how many do you think?
In municipalities,
Yeah.
anything above 15 is considered very good.
We have 25 and we're not done because it's not full yet. So those dollars can be, I can't promise this because we don't have a council here, so I can't, but I can tell you that there's a possibility that, your mill rate could be, dropped, that your taxes might be lower because you have a very large tax coming into your, municipality. That is not usual. I can say just briefly that Lansdale, who only had around 3,000 of a population when they became a municipality, do not have 25% taxation. And yet there they are. There they are managing, and they're managing quite well. In fact, I think it was the past 3 years, they didn't even increase their taxes. So we want to understand that there are things that although we hear we're going to need more RCMP. Well, we are anyway. We're going to grow at any rate, and we're going to need more RCMP. So whether we pay for it now or we pay for it 2 years from now, we're going to pay for it. And the same with everything else. We are going to grow, and that's okay. But we pay for that growth, but we pay for a lot of it with our taxation. And like I said, we're not even full. In the industrial area. So there's things to think about, but I think it's the incorporation study where we get the numbers because we don't have them right now. So this really isn't a time, I think, to make a decision, right? Until we have those numbers. So I want you to know that we're not done. This is the middle part. Yes. So thank you so much for coming. Got another one on Thursday. It's not all about.